I had an audition. This was after I did the movie Grease, and I was in New York hoping to get a career back on the stage after being in, I think at that time, maybe I was in 3 or 4 films. And my agent said, "How would you like to work with a Beatle?" I said, "What? Work with a Beatle?" "Yes, Ringo Starr is going to be part of this new show for children called Shining Time Station. And you would be the station mistress, Stacy Jones." So I said, "Work with a Beatle?" And at that point, I didn't know how popular the Thomas stories were, because I think I was maybe at that time 30 or 29 something, but apparently Thomas was already such a rage in England, and this was the introduction of Thomas and all his adventures and all the other trains to America. So I went in, and there was Britt and Rick Sigelcow, who were the executive. She was the executive producer. He was the producer. It was fun. I had a great time. My background before getting into films was touring with the children's pantomime company. I mean, performing for children. We were adults, but so children's theater was my background. The story was fun. It was fun to see that Stacy Jones had this magic ability to transform things. Some of that kind of went away. The special effects maybe were too expensive, I don't know, but she still had a magical quality that I liked. I remember the first time I had a conversation with Britt about the show after I was hired to play Stacy Jones, and we were in the studio, and she was so elegant, so beautiful, and spoke with this, perfect English accent, and I kind of marveled at what a ingenious person she was, because at that point now I heard about what a phenomenon Thomas was in England and how she created all these stories. She got the rights to it, and Britt Allcroft is definitely a visionary. She sees what she wants, and she makes it happen. We had finished making the series, and we made some hour-long specials of Shining Time Station, which were wonderful. Britt said, "We're going to go to the Isle of Man, where the Reverend who wrote the stories lived, where the original Thomas the Train lived and worked." And I just flipped. I was so excited to be a part of creating this dream of hers into a full-length feature film. Shining Time Station was, the main set was the station. When we did some specials, we went on location, but the station was where people came in and out. So there was always some very interesting, sometimes bizarre characters. And then there was my foil, my nemesis schemer, who was always creating some kind of mischief. Whereas in the movie, everything was expanded upon. The vistas of the Isle of Man were so magnificent that Britt, her own imagination, began to open up the story to all the places that Thomas would have passed on his route. So we traveled all around the island, seeing all the places, and we were actually in a station that they created to make a Shining Time Station. What was great about working with Britt as a director is that she knew every Thomas story, and she knew about all the other trains and their idiosyncrasies and their wants and their disappointments and their mischievousness. She knew everything. So there was a depth to every character, including the trains, that only she could produce, because she knew them so well, so intimately. There was a shot in the film where I think we're waiting for a truck to come. Peter Fonda and I were waiting, and we were just, relaxing and waiting and relaxing, and then we were sitting, and then we were lying down in the grass. And he told me, I didn't, if you think about Easy Rider, he's a motorcycle rider, so he was telling me about how famous the Isle of Man was. Even for adults, it's motorcycle races. So he was telling me all about the races that he had been in and the ones coming up. And Russell and I, we again, it was just in awe of these vistas. We would just, in between takes, just be standing on cliffs looking out at the ocean and just feeling the contact with the land was and Russell was very funny too. He was enjoyed his company. I have a son who's now going to be 28 this month, but he was very little when we did Shining Time Station, and he's autistic. So we're going back to the dark ages of autism. Well, Shining Time Station, but mainly Thomas and all the stories and all the friends, is such a popular series for autistic children, boys and girls. There is something, and I have to relate this back to Britt's heart, that is so sweet and gentle, and the stories are engaging in a way that's not frightening in any way or disturbing in any way. Even if there's a problem, the problem's going to get solved, I did a lot of going to openings of different stores that were featuring the Thomas characters and signing autographs. And I would have, like, around me, like the Pied Piper, all these kids that just didn't want to leave Stacy's side. One little boy just was sitting on my lap the whole time. And his father said, "You don't understand. He loves you. He wanted to be you for Halloween." It really captures this very sensitive heart of an autistic child. And I know that the movie was able to do that as well.
The year that I scored Thomas and Magic Railroad was actually a very busy career year. In fact, I had been up to Toronto to record an IMAX film just months prior, and it was interesting that both of these projects were recorded in Toronto. The other thing that was interesting is that several months before that, I also scored another film starring Peter Fonda. The funny story about how I got Thomas is that I ended up being in Los Angeles doing meetings as I usually do. I was living at that time on an island outside of Seattle. What happened is that I was in my office, and my agent had been trying to get hold of the production company to try to get me an interview for the job, and it had some problems reaching people. So I said, I'm in my office, I'm just going to put my phone on auto dial and I'll keep on dialing, and finally got through. And when I got hold of somebody, a live human being, what ended up happening is that they told me that the director, Britt Alcroft, was then in Los Angeles, because she didn't live in Los Angeles either. She was in Los Angeles interviewing composers that day. And so I said, is there any way that I can run over to her place and drop some stuff off? And they allowed me to take a bunch of CDs. I took 7 or 8 CDs of my soundtracks and ran over to Britt's house in Santa Monica and handed them off to the housekeeper. By the time I got back to my office, there was already a message on my machine that Britt wanted to meet with me. So I ran back to Santa Monica and had a meeting with Britt, and we sat there talking for about an hour, and then I had to catch a plane to go back to Seattle, and the next morning I was hired for the job. I was also very familiar with the material because my 2 daughters had grown up watching Shining Time Station and were familiar with Thomas and all the other characters on Shining Time Station. When I first got involved with the Thomas project, the film was still in rough cut, and they were doing some test screenings. Most of the diehard Thomas fans are aware that there was an original script that had another character in it. And unfortunately, at one of the screenings, they brought in an audience that was mostly 4- and 5-year-olds who loved the movie when Thomas was on camera, but as soon as the live action people were on camera alone, they got very fidgety. Basically, it was recommended that they pull out one of the characters and make it more Thomas and his friends centric. Britt did so, and I know she was not very happy about that. So I never got to score that because the changes were made before I actually was scoring the film. I had already written the themes because the songs existed, but the other character, P.T. Boomer, was lost on the cutting room floor. I was at the now infamous screening with the 4-year-olds, and Britt was very upset because she felt that she was really making a family movie, not a children's movie, and that taking out P.T. Boomer, I think they took out P.T. Boomer to try to simplify this plot line and also to have less humans on camera and more of the trains on camera. I had a great time scoring this film. I ended up being allowed to write 3 songs for the movie. I wrote one with my lyricist Sue Ennis and 2 with lyricist Don Black. They became the main themes of the movie. This Is Your Shining Time became the main theme for Shining Time Station and for basically the underlying story. There was a piece called I Know How the Moon Must Feel, and that became Lily's theme. And then there was Some Things Never Leave You, which became Burnett's theme. It was more of a solemn kind of waltz. Strangely enough, not all the scenes that they were originally written for ended up in the film. Unfortunately, the film went through some changes at the last minute, and one of the scenes there was Burnett and his wife Tasha, as younger people, were dancing to the song. Basically what happens is that whenever a composer's starting to work on a film, you watch the film and try to figure the best way of translating the visuals into a musical statement. And the thing that I knew about Thomas, and I would say that whether Britt actually told me this or it just came out through conversation, was not to play down to the kids. Even though it was not necessarily a children's movie, it was not, she didn't want anybody feeling like they were played down to it. In fact, it's very interesting because one of the songs that I wrote, the Shining Time, This Is Your Shining Time, has a very challenging melody. The original idea was there was going to be a young woman, singing that song. And Britt made the rather astute observation that where we hear the song the first time in the film is right after Mr. Conductor talks, and so it should be sung by a man. So now we already had the track done, we had everything finished, and it was like, oh, okay, so now we have to find a guy who can sing in the right range. And we brought in a couple of singers who actually couldn't sing the melody because it was too challenging for them. And so there was a lot of things that I tried to do where I was getting much hipper melodic content and much hipper harmonic content, but still it had to be, it's a fantastical world. It's Thomas and talking trains, but it couldn't all be fantastical. So I saved the more fantastical type of music for when they were transitioning from Shining Time to Muffled Mountain. And so when they're traveling through the Magic Railroad, along the Magic Railroad. So there were points where it had to be fantastical, but it could never play down to the children. And that was one of the things that Britt was very adamant about. This was kind of a dream project. I had a very generous budget. I was able to hire, I think it was an 85 or 90 piece orchestra. A lot of composers these days do mock-ups of electronic mock-ups of their entire score. And Britt didn't require that. She heard the themes, but pretty much Britt was kind of hands-off, and she really trusted me a lot, which I really appreciated.
I used to watch the show with my kids. So I was an adult fan, really enjoyed the puppets, really enjoyed, George Carlin, really enjoyed Ringo Starr. That was when my kids were growing up, and we would sit and watch Thomas. It played a large role in me pursuing getting the assignment of scoring the film, is because I was a fan of Thomas and knew the character's name. I'm kind of blown away how big Thomas is. I did not get a sense of the scope of it. Walking into toy stores and seeing entire walls of just Thomas materials and, of course, lunchboxes and rulers, and it was huge. Obviously, the Thomas moments were smaller little moments. It was visually exciting to watch. I also really loved the fact that my kids loved watching it so much. And as much as watching the show, I was watching it through their eyes and how attractive this was to them. Again, I was kind of a little bit blown away by how many different companies were under the Britt Allcroft umbrella, because one company that just did licensing of the show, and there was another one that just did licensing of the image for products, and they had offices in like 6 cities. It was massive. I was aware of the movie because of the trades in Hollywood that list what's in production and stuff. And my agent had been trying to get in touch with the company and had no luck. So I was down in Los Angeles one week, and I called my agent. I said, any luck with Thomas and the Magic Railroad? And he said, well, I've been calling and calling, but they haven't returned my calls. And I said, well, let me try. I was going to call them every 5 minutes until somebody answered the phone and not leave any messages because I don't want to be a pest. In my office, I used to have a certain kind of telephone that would automatically redial if it got a busy signal. So I turned it on, and I kept getting busy signals for about 20 minutes, and then finally it started ringing. So I picked it up, and I got an assistant on the phone, and I said, hi, my name is Hummie Mann. I'm a film composer. I'm really interested in this project. Has a composer already been picked, or, am I too late? And they said, oh, no, your timing's actually very good. She's in Los Angeles, and she's meeting with film composers. Why don't you run over some of your materials? So I grabbed a bunch of soundtrack albums of other movies I'd done, drove to her house. I was met with the housekeeper, and the housekeeper took the CDs and said, "Thank you very much," and closed the door. So I turned around and drove back to my office. By the time I got to my office, there was a message: "Britt wants to meet with you. Can you come back to her house?" So I then got back in my car, drove right back to Santa Monica, and then Britt and I proceeded to have about a 45 to 50-minute conversation. And that night I was flying back to Seattle, and the next morning my agent called and says, "Well, they've offered you the job." I could have missed it by 24 hours if I hadn't been in Los Angeles. I was very excited to become part of this. Britt was kind of a visionary. I mean, she saw the potential of these little books. Reverend Aubrey was obviously the first one, but the fact that she saw this potential, she was a very passionate woman. I mean, she definitely believed in not only the strength of Thomas, but also she recognized what she created. She was very easy to work with. I mean, she had a lot of trust. You have to kind of build trust the first time you're working with somebody. It was funny because she was a little concerned that the Diesel 10 theme was too scary. Even the mystery parts, where there's a scene where they're going through the magic buffers. Britt definitely wanted me to make those moments more cinematic and more, don't worry about scaring the kids too much, but, be careful, don't take it too far. And traveling through the buffers and all of that stuff had to be more magical. Junior, his role, he was kind of like this easygoing, laid-back kind of guy, so his thing was a little more jazzy, a little more playful. That was one of Britt's favorite themes from the movie. She loved that one. Diesel 10 had his own theme, and then Glider and Dodge were kind of, they had a version of Diesel 10's theme because they were kind of on the bad guys theme. Thomas obviously had his own theme. And then there were moments where I brought in some secondary material when there was somebody else who was on the screen a little bit longer. And obviously Lily and Peter Fonda. I mean, a lot of that material was based upon the song. So the theme, like Lily's theme is, I know how the moon must feel, and it comes back in a variety of versions of it. And Peter Fonda's character is the song "Some Things Never Leave You." The song "Shining Time" gets used in triumphant moments, even on the Isle of Sodor. So it travels back and forth all over the place in the movie. I wrote all the music, with the exception of when we quoted, there's a version of "He's a Really Useful Engine" in the movie, and the Thomas theme got used in little snippets because it was incorporated in the score, and it was quoted in the score. But basically, my way of working is I spent a couple days or weeks writing the themes and coming up with the different variations that I'm going to need, and then I start at the beginning of the film and I adapt the score as appropriate. And another moment that I really like is the scene where Mr. Conductor is trying to figure things out, and he's eating a carrot. He's walking back and forth, and he's pacing back and forth. If you go and listen to that, there was a very interesting technical problem that I had to solve, where he's figuring something out and he's going, "Wait a second, maybe it means this." There's a term in scoring animation called Mickey Mousing. You would play a note on every step. If a character's going ding 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 ding, but it wasn't quite that, but it was almost that, because he was trying to solve this problem. It was a challenging piece to write for technical reasons, and I like to think that the technical stuff doesn't stick out, but the musicality of it sticks out. One of the things that's different about scoring a film versus being a concert composer is that people who are concert composers are taught to find their own voice, so that so they've created a sound that's theirs. And I think that the job of the film composer is to find the voice of the film. Does it become more fantastical or more just living in the Isle of Sodor? Is it just going to be more trains and not as much human interaction? Because one of the things about trains is that as great as the Thomas characters are, a lot of the emotion that they feel gets portrayed by the music because they have such limited, body language. What we talk about in film scoring is that music is like the third dimension of a film, because it's really in two dimensions, but it kind of brings you in and gives you more emotional response. And so depending upon the story, Thomas might have to have a more emotional theme or a theme that emotes different types of things. One of the standout moments was when, at the time that I was working on the film, there were these 3 songs, and they were supposed to get me the singers before I came to Toronto, so that I could make sure that the arrangements of the songs were done in the right keys for these singers. Anyway, push comes to shove is they didn't get me the singer who was going to sing Shining Time. Now, the arrangement had been living in my brain for weeks. So when we played it, there was one of the last things we recorded, and I was dissatisfied, not because it was a bad arrangement, but because I'd had this image in my mind of parts that I wanted to have in it. So I walked into the booth where the director and the producer were sitting and saying, so here's the deal, guys. It's not what I wanted it to be. So I can go out there and I can dictate a lot of changes to make it what I want it to be, or we can do another session. Another session is going to be a lot more expensive. And here the producer and the director basically agreed that they loved the score so much that they said, no, we'll let you come back tomorrow and we'll do it again. They were that supportive of the score. Was pretty rare and pretty spectacular. There's a whole backstory about the fact that I wasn't the first composer that was on the film. John Barry was supposed to do it, and then for some reason he was unavailable. He was the person that I guess Britt originally wanted to work. The film went through a lot of modifications. There was another character in the movie who got cut out on the cutting room floor, P.T. Boomer. So originally he was the bad guy, and then it didn't end up that way, and Diesel 10 ended up being the bad guy. So it was very interesting to see the film kind of get remolded. And it primarily because the film company that was the producing entity was very concerned about the fact that when Thomas wasn't on camera, or the trains weren't on camera, the audience got restless. And they based that on a test screening where they had almost exclusively 4-year-old kids. I think that Britt believed, and probably rightly so, that this movie could go to kids that were older, maybe 10 or 11 even. She was very upset that when they chose the test audience for the test screening, that all these kids were very, very young. And so the production company basically, I can't say forced her, but convinced her that they should play on the strengths, which is really Thomas, and we don't need P.T. Boomer because he's just a bad guy that no one's going to watch anyway. It was an unfortunate thing that, Britt I think probably to the end, probably regretted that she didn't stand up to the producers and make the film that she wanted to make. There's a thing in the movie business called final cut, which means that the director gets to make the movie they want to make. Very few directors are given final cut. It's not a common occurrence. There are moments in the film where there's dialogue, luckily none of the trains move their lips, so they could put any dialogue underneath the train. But there are moments in the film that I'm familiar with where there's a cut to Peter Fonda, and he's in the middle of a sentence, and then they cut away to get Lily's reaction, and it's a new line. It wasn't the line that was in the original screenplay. It's interesting because the first thing that I was asked to work on were the songs in the movie. The Shining Time song, Some Things Never Leave You, and I Know How the Moon Must Feel. And that was going on while they were still going through the re-editing process. I don't remember if I wrote a theme for P.T. Boomer or not, because they were recutting it, cut into the time from the score, and because I need to have the picture locked or no longer without any more edits going on. They kept on sending me different versions of the film, not to score, but I needed them in order to start figuring out which characters I'm going to have to write themes for. Part of the trick of scoring a film is that you have to hit all these timings, and everything has to match. When you cut to this or you cut to that, or a piece of action happens, the music has to respond to it. So you can't really start until they've got the picture pretty much locked. And when I first got on, like I mentioned, the first screening that I went to had P.T. Boomer in it, had a lot more Peter Fonda and Mara Wilson's characters. The other thing that was very interesting is that some of the characters, some of the train characters, their voices kept changing every time that I get a different version of the film. Britt wanted, John Barry or me, so they wanted us to take it up another level. And that's not to say, Mike and Junior wouldn't have been able to do it. They were probably pretty angry at me because apparently at some point they thought they were going to get the score of the film. So I think that they probably were not happy that I was. It was one thing losing out to John Barry, and I understand I would have been upset also. I used to work on The Simpsons, and the lead composer of The Simpsons didn't get to score the feature film of The Simpsons. So the one thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to, respect what they had done, which was, he's a very useful engine, So I actually quote that in the opening of the movie, and then I introduce my theme. I wanted to pepper the score with little bits of flavor of those two pieces. And I've been told by Brennan that Mike really liked the score. I mean, I'm sure, again, knowing the history, that I believe they thought that they were going to get the score, and I could understand them having a certain amount of animosity towards me. But I was totally unaware of what was going on until literally after I'd finished the project. One of my biggest regrets about working on the film is that I was in Toronto a couple of times and I never went to the set. I wish I had gone to the set, to see these trains and how they bring them to life. And yeah, it was. I really regret that I never did that. That was one of my biggest regrets about working on the movie, is I didn't have a chance to do that. It was strange that some of the reviews, some of them were highly negative, but like they would complain about the fact that in this day and age, not having the train's mouths move is unconscionable. Like, to me, part of the flavor of Thomas. I've enjoyed watching people, reenact parts of the movie with my score, especially the chase sequence. Amazingly to me, the video excerpt of the film of the chase sequence has been watched 34 million times. It's like Beyonce territory. I'm a little bit flabbergasted at how big the fan group is, and I teach film composition now. One of my graduates has a daughter who is on the spectrum, and there was a concert probably a year and a half ago of a bunch of my music. It was like a night of Hummie, Mann. And we performed the suite from Thomas and the Magic Railroad. And he said that it was just so amazing because his daughter would lean over at the beginning of every theme and says, "That's where Thomas chases him. That's where, that's where, like she can identify every single piece of music and what scene was going on at the time in the movie." And he said it was just so incredible to see his daughter have this amazing reaction to this music. I've had requests for the sheet music from I Know How the Moon Must Feel. There was a woman who was auditioning for a Broadway show part, and she wanted to use that song as part of her audition. I've had a number of people who've written me over the years and said, this is the first orchestral album I ever owned, and it made me want to become a musician. And I'm now an aspiring film composer because of your soundtrack to Thomas and the Magic Railroad. Just the fact that there's all these Thomas fans who love the movie and who have supported the movie, and who obviously I'm honored when people want to record my songs or take pieces of my score and recut their own versions of things. Yeah, and it was a great working experience. These people really, appreciated what I brought to the party and gave me all the resources necessary to do it. I mean, we had like an 85-piece orchestra. That's not an inexpensive proposition. I think there's no question that I'm very thankful that the fans have taken so much to my music. And thank all the people who've written me amazing emails and told me amazing stories about how the music has affected them and affected their lives. I'm honored that that I'm now kind of embraced by this incredible fan base of these people who see the magic in Thomas, and I'm proud to be part of it. I'm proud to have played a role in it. And I'm glad to be someone who was part of the creative team that created some product that you all have responded so positively to. So thank you.
So just to give you a bit of a backstory, this started in June 2025, the end of June. A friend of mine in the television industry, who I've been friends with for years, nothing to do with Thomas, he told me he'd received a letter from a bankruptcy firm in Canada saying a company owned by another much larger company that I'm not going to name was going into insolvency, and they had found some stuff in storage to do with his work, which I was also quite invested in. I think it was naughty stuff, and he said, "Well, what do you think we should do?" And I said, "I'll go and rescue it." So I did, and as I was going through the list of assets to try and mark off what we needed, there was a whole heap of Thomas and the Magic Railroad stuff, and that's kind of where that began. So after realizing exactly what I was looking at, or even a rough semblance of what I was looking at, which was a terrifying realization, I went to Carty and said, they've got all this stuff and they're about to throw it out. So the next day, because the story goes, Carty was really, really tired and had back pain, so he didn't fully comprehend it until the next day he realised, holy shit. So I said, I'm going to rescue this naughty stuff, and I also found Mumphy and Little Bear as well. I'm going to rescue all this, so I'll just grab it all. Magic Railroad. So we put down a list of about 300 assets, and we saved it from being thrown out about 7 days to go, I think. From what I remember, they were going to throw it out at June 30th or something. So once it all arrived, it was really interesting because we started slowly going through CDs. Well, what little ones I could actually read because the data on them was over 25 years old and they were recorded with Mac computers. And of course, Mac file systems from that time period, they're not going to be compatible with Windows 11 or whatever you've got now, you know. I got them all working. It took some time, but we slowly started to realize what we were sitting on was all of the voice recordings, a lot of the music stuff, all of the stuff for the final film, like sound effects. And we realized, well, we were talking about it. We had an idea before it arrived. Well, let's see if we can make a director's cut. But it wasn't until we looked at it all that we realized the scope, or even the beginning of the scope of what we had. You know, materials from that leaked chase scene from 2009, like those voice clips, we had all that from the recording sessions. Realizing that what we actually had was, you know, there was a different cast. We didn't realize there was a whole different cast in between where they kept John Bellis Thomas and Michael Angelis Splatter and Dodge, and they had Eddie Glenn as Percy and a bunch of these other guys that we spent ages trying to figure out who the hell they were. We also had a number of obsolete tape formats such as DAT and DA88, which I couldn't preview from my system at home, but I, you know, running a record label, I know all about those formats and we've worked with them before heaps of times. So I sent them to my usual tape guy, and within like a week and a half, he had them all done. I don't know how he did it because it was hours and hours of audio. And so that had all the raw recording sessions, like without all the bits cut out. It was useful for identifying some of the actor names. And also we've discovered we had the audio for the test screening 1 and the second test screening temp mix 2. So using those, you know, you get the idea of how they projected it and what it was. Even though it was just the audio, you've got the mix that they did with all the temp score. That, and also that's where we got the original 99 cast voice lines from, so that was exciting. We had a lot of stuff that was previously unavailable. By the time this thing's ready for release, around like the end of next year, I think people are going to be very pleasantly surprised.
As a child, I loved this movie. I loved all things Thomas. When the movie came out in December 2000 in Australia, my mum took my brother and I to see it. My brother wasn't even a year old, and I was 2 years old, and apparently I just sat there completely quiet. I don't know any 2-year-olds who go to a movie cinema and just sit there quiet, transfixed. I think that says a lot about the film and Thomas in general. A little 2-year-old's going to be running around and being loud, or being upset by how loud the movie is, but I'm sitting there just, according to my mother, I'm just sitting there staring at it like it's the second coming of Christ or something. And I love telling people that story because it sort of proves the impact this movie and Thomas as a whole had on me. What happened was a friend of mine in the film industry in the US alerted me to a big company that I won't name in Canada was going bankrupt, and they had contacted him. The insolvency firm had contacted him because they'd seen stuff with his name on it, which was to do with Noddy. He knew me, and he knew I was real big into Noddy, and I've got a lot of the Noddy music rights. This is the US Noddy, the Noddy shop. Yeah, so he sent me this thing and said, you should contact these people. You reckon we should save this stuff? And I'm like, oh, of course. I don't want it to get thrown out. So I go through this list that this company has of assets that are being chucked. And so all of a sudden I'm scrolling down the list and I see all this Thomas stuff. This is all the audio assets and voice recordings and data, stuff like that of the Magic Railroad. But then I start realizing by reading the titles that some of these are early versions, because you've got stuff like P.T. Boomer, who of course was a character that was going to be in the film that they completely cut. Once I noticed that, I was like, oh my God, we've got to do something about this. So I spoke to my friend Carty, who's a very prominent member of the Thomas the Tank Engine community and a friend of mine for going on 13 years at this point. For him, it took him a day, and for me too. It took us both a day to realise exactly what we were looking at. And he went, "You've just found the director's cut." The stuff was about to get thrown out in 7 days. For all we know, we could have been too late. I don't know what their policies were. All I know was as soon as I knew about it, I wrote up the email to the insolvency people. I explained it. I also had a long think about it and said, do I bother with this? And then I said, yes, because if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to live with myself, knowing that stuff got thrown out because I was like, no, it's not worth it. So ultimately we got it. It was just a box full of CDRs with old Pro Tools file formats from the 90s, and a lot of that stuff didn't work. So I spent hours getting the computer to read these ancient files, but it worked. Then there was DAT tapes and DA88 audio tapes for the ADR and voice recording sessions. We spent a considerable amount of money getting those transferred as a team. And ultimately, at the end of it, what came out was we had every version, every voice recording, so we could make all these different versions, which, of course, we didn't know there were that many of them. We thought there was always this old cast and the new one. No, there were 4 different casts. There was 2 extra ones in the middle. Mm-hmm. Through this, we realised we're sitting on something big. So then Cardi and I just went from it being a fun sort of side project to taking it really seriously. So that sort of takes us up to, I guess that's how we decided to do it. Of course, Cardi knew Brit very well. I knew Brit not as well, but I did know her. And somebody who was so influential in creating a part of my childhood, I was like, no, we've got to do this. The big problem with it was that the distributor, Destination Films, cut the film against Brit's will, because, of course, an executive producer on a movie can do that. They wrecked it. They cut out all these integral parts. Suddenly you've got this really disjointed story. Like, I still loved the film as a kid, but it's a really disjointed story about this old guy that's sad about this train that doesn't work, but all of his motivations and his reasoning and the reason why he stopped believing in magic, all that's gone. But in Britt Allcroft's version, that was all there and it was explained, and you suddenly actually give a crap about what these characters' intentions and their motivations were. The fact that Britt was forced to, was forced into a position where she had to resign and was blacklisted from making films in that Hollywood, that's disgusting, because that wasn't even her fault. The other thing about it bombing at the box office, regardless of how good or bad it was, I think a lot of it was actually down to the fact that a lot of the audience were little kids, so some movie cinemas would have had them get in for free, which is good, but
actually, you know what? That's a really good point, because I know the Wiggles movie had the same issue as well, because their audiences, like they would have had the same thing. Kids under 3 get in for free, and then obviously,
I told you, I was 2 when I saw this film in cinemas.
It would have been very easy to get into the cinema. I guess that's why. Obviously it wasn't aimed at all ages, so it was very clear of who its target audience was, which can be a problem. And it was the same with the Wiggles movie. It did do well on VHS, actually. That way you can buy as many copies as you can. And probably would have been the same for Thomas and the Magic Railroad. But I think...
Absolutely, yeah.
But because, it's pretty much the same as the Wiggles movie. Because the audience were under the age of 3, majority of them, it would have been very hard to distribute how many. It could have made more, but because the audience were underage, really little kids, obviously the film wouldn't have made the revenue that it would have.
And I'm not saying that our director's
and its budget was what was the film's budget again?
Yeah, personally, I think the reported budget isn't accurate, because the more that we discover, Brit must have been putting money out of her own pocket into this, and the more we discover about it, the sadder the story is, because she put her whole heart and soul into this and lost everything.
It says 19 million according to Wikipedia. And the film made $19.7 million. Think about how much it could have made if they charged kids under 3.
Would have at least doubled the money. Tripled, maybe.
At least doubled the money, or at least made it over 100 million.
No,
which is on a 19 million budget.
Yeah, I think it's quite unfair that people say that it bombed, because I think it wouldn't have mattered how good or bad it was. Anybody who liked Thomas would have gone to see it, and a lot of those at that time period, a lot of those kids would have been 2 or 3 or even 1. Or in the case of my brother who went with us, he wasn't even a year old. So you can imagine that there would have been a whole shitload of kids like that. It's kind of, they were rigged from the start, unfortunately.
I'm wondering if the restoration will include this, because I think this is just one. If I have any criticisms for a Thomas the Tank Engine film, you've got not $20 million. It's a lot of money for a Thomas the Tank Engine film. That the very least they could have done was have their mouths move. I think
Well,
that's an understandable criticism.
Yeah, I mean, I get both sides of the coin. From a general audience standpoint, I can understand why they were bothered by it, but as somebody who inherently understands the reasoning of what made Thomas what it was, I know why they didn't, and it's because that was the whole charm of the programs. The mouths didn't move. It was filmed the exact same way they shot the television episodes, and that's the way I see it. I know for a fact as well they were.
It was a television show too. It was a television show, so they wouldn't have had the budget like they would for the film. So I guess that's where the controversy is.
But that being said, I don't think that was why they did it for budget reasons. I think it was an aesthetic. I'm pretty sure it was an aesthetic reason.
So more of a nostalgic reason, yeah.
Yeah, it was an aesthetic in the TV show. They wanted them to look like that and be very exaggerated. I mean, it was like Brit's whole thing with Thomas was it was supposed to look like storybook TV, like you're reading, like listening to the guy narrating it, and so it makes sense. Like in the pictures of the Railway Series books by the Reverend Audrey, the faces were still, and I think that's what they were going for. And I guess it makes sense to replicate that in the film. It would have been a little bit jarring had they done that. I know there were talks of it happening early on in the production, and they did shoot with the intent at first to do that, but they stopped very quickly because they realized it wouldn't work and it would be a bit pointless. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on it.
I think that's a great analysis that you've brought there, and obviously, for very good reasons, and that's why I guess you're inspired to bring this original cut back. Do we have an estimate of the original cut? Because the film version went for about 80 minutes.
Well, I can tell you our current work in progress is 1 hour, 40 minutes.
Oh, okay, 100 minutes. I was like, I thought you meant 140 minutes. I was like, a 2.5 hour film, really?
Yeah, no, that's about what they shot, but that's not. That'll be as long as the assembly cut version we're making will probably be about 2 hours 30, not the director's cut. That'll be 1 hour 40 minutes. That is exactly 100. You're right. So it's about 101 minutes. It's not too long. It's in that sort of sweet spot for a children's film.
An average children's film, yeah.
So that, as you can understand, that assembly version we want to make, which at some point we'll put it up, an assembly cut version of the film, which is $19.99. It has the original cast, including Keith Scott, Patrick Breen, Michael Angelis, John Bellis. It's just sort of a reconstruction. Now, this isn't the director's cut. This is the assembly cut, which is more of a side project. It would be the longest version of the film, and the whole reason we're making that is for the diehard fans, because there are people that would sit down and watch a 2 hour and 30-minute Thomas the Tank Engine movie, believe it or not.
Keith Scott feels that's the other thing. We had him on the show, and he was replaced as the original voice of Diesel because he said the test audiences thought that his version was too scary.
Yeah.
But then you listen to it, and it's like, that is kind of what I would picture Diesel to actually sound like for some reason.
Yeah, he was Gordon as well in this version.
Gordon. I didn't know he was Gordon. I don't think he was.
Yeah, very briefly you can hear Gordon, and he's got an Aussie accent. Yeah, that's Keith as well. The story he tells is that's what the distributors told him, and he doesn't really buy the story. And to be honest, I think he's right, because I can tell you the people at Destination Films, they certainly didn't know what they were doing. They cut this film 12 times. There are 12 cuts of this goddamn movie. That gives you an idea of how much they butchered it.
It's so important for audiences to know this film and its original cut just because of the controversy that arose from it. But I think I think from what it sounds like, the whole goal of making this is to bring justice to Britt Allcroft and her legacy. And, and unfortunately, she's now no longer here to see the original version. And it's, and we hope, and I hope too, that it's going to explain a lot. And I think it'll help don't know how much it'll help, but it might even expose the decision-making abilities of the studios back then, so that future studios understand to maybe trust the
creatives.
and don't just keep relying on focus groups who don't represent the majority to tell you.
Well, the problem with the test audience is they tested it in Los Angeles, and Los Angeles is factually, like in America, the place where the least amount of people knew what Thomas was. What they should have done was tested it in New York or Pennsylvania or somewhere in the US, or even Toronto, where they made most of the movie, in Canada. Places where Thomas was massive. But LA, it never really had that reach, and that was a big problem.
Yeah.
I could go on for hours and hours, but of course we don't have the time for that. But
Well, when it gets closer to the release, when's the expected release date for the restoration cut?
Well,
the director's cut, whatever it's called.
Yeah, the director's cut. Well, we originally wanted to do it November this year, but because of circumstances beyond our control and involving looking for more materials, we'll probably have to push it back till 2027 or something. But we'll keep updating, and there'll be all kinds of stuff. But also, like you said, I don't know if it'll change people's minds. I mean, that's not really the goal. The goal here is to preserve what Brit wanted, and these other versions sort of in between, because all the fans would love that, regardless of whether they like the movie. I personally think it will change people's minds. There's some scenes that we're putting back in that are really heartwarming or funny or meaningful to the story in some way. They make the emotions they evoke are quite strong, whether they're humorous or really sad or really funny, or even a little bit of scary stuff, but nothing too scary because it's a kids' movie. Yeah. All the stuff we're putting back in, I think it will change people's minds. Not everybody. I personally think they could have released this in Brit's ideal version, and the critics still would have hated it. Their job is to hate movies.
You'll get people who just don't like comics in general, which I don't blame.
Yeah, of course, everybody's tastes are different, but I do think that a lot of people that this will change a lot of people's views on the movie.
I think it'll change a lot of opinions on Brit. I feel bad for Brit. Like that it's so bad to have the film bomb that bad that you end up quitting your own company. That's just, I hope it really shines a light onto that.
Yeah, well,
and brings her justice.
Absolutely. She's got a pretty bad rap, and it's by no fault of her own. She was always a very headstrong and stubborn lady, but she was a brilliant businesswoman, and she loved Thomas. She loved Thomas and Mumphy, the other show that she did. She loved those things with her heart. I've never seen somebody so passionate about something they've created. And I think that's what shines through. That's what should shine through. And like you said, the movie should sort of do her a bit of justice, because as difficult as Brit could be to work with at times, she was such an integral part of people's childhoods. And without Brit, I know I certainly probably wouldn't be in the spot I am now. Without Thomas, it did a lot for me as a kid. It does a lot for me as an adult.
It's incredible, man. I mean, and your journey too has been incredible, and the fact that you're at this point restoring the film, I mean, that's all the inspiration I think anyone would need to, want to, try their hardest to not pester people to release rare material, but to look at what you're doing and be like, that's incredible, inspiring, because it's like, and I say inspiring as in not inspiring in the way of it's changing people's lives, but it's inspiring to be reminded of a simpler time in our lives.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, but also I'd like to give a shout out to Carty, who's my partner on this project, and he's doing all the visual editing, sound mixing. I've mixed all the songs because we went back to the songs and stuff, but I think he deserves some credit as well. It's very nice of you to say that, but I think it's sort of a team effort.
Shout out to Cardi as well. Yeah, you two are doing a great job with this project so far, and I was really intrigued from it. So yeah,
thanks,
definitely a Joey Wiggle experience exclusive.
Yeah,
and we can't wait to next year, man.
Yeah, no, neither can I. And we wanted to show you something, especially after you interviewed Keith Scott. And then I saw that interview, and then that was, you'd emailed me a week before, but as you know, busy, it takes time to things. And then once I saw the Keith interview, I went back and went, yeah, I'm gonna do this interview. I think it'll be worthwhile.
Yeah. And because I knew you were working on this project in particular as well. I mean, you're quite an inspirational person to, for a lot of us to look up to at the moment. I mean, the fact that you're doing all this great, wonderful stuff, whether it's uploading old Play School episodes, getting the TV or music rights to many of the shows that we've forgotten about over the years, and now working on the original cut of the Thomas and the Magic Railroad film. Like, what more could be done? Like, that's just incredible, man. You're an inspiration.
Thanks, dude. It means so much to hear that from a fellow fan and collector of all these old shows. It's one thing just to hear it, but to take it in and go, whoa, people really view me as that. And I'm sitting here like I'm just a funny guy with autism that really likes ABC Kids. But it's really heartwarming.
That's totly different. Old ABC Kids.
Yes.
And I'm totally the same. I'm stuck in my nostalgic mind.
Yeah. Look, I'm going to be 80 and I'm still going to like this stuff. I'm not going to. It's my life.
I'm going to be 80 and I'm going to be talking about how nostalgic Bob the Builder will be.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Bob the Builder's a great series, man. I see why you love it so much. And the Wiggles.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was just because it was the most popular thing at the time. It was basically Paw Patrol of the 2000s.
Yeah.
Created by the same dude.
Yeah, although this one was actually good.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's a lot of great information to take in for today. And I'm so excited to see the final cut of the Thomas the Tank Engine's director's cut. And we will definitely have you back on when the release date is closer so we can talk more about it, because obviously there's a lot to talk about. But
yeah, I'd be honoured, man.
I mean, my co-host, we got other stuff going on at the moment, so we're going to have to wrap things up. But anyway, thank you so much, Joseph. From one Joey to another Joey. Thank you so much, man, for taking the time to discuss what you've been doing and what's coming up next. And it's just so inspiring. It's so wonderful, and it's great to hear you talk about it, man. Thank you so much.
It's an honour, and I'm happy to do this again further down the track. This was lovely. Had a good time.
Yeah, you too. And thank you to everyone for listening and watching to today's special episode. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and don't forget to follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, etc., etc. And before we wrap up, Joseph, would you like to do the honours and signing off our show?
They didn't use me. Yes, they thought I was too scary for little kids to listen to. So I did him as an impersonation of Billy Bletcher, the little actor who used to be the big bad wolf for Walt Disney. So,
well, I mean, I still have the director's
that sort of voice. And when they said after they listened to it, it was like too scary. So I was replaced.
Yeah.
But I did. They flew me all the way to Toronto, Canada, from Sydney, Australia, to do that.
And you met Michael Angelis, the original UK narrator.
God rest his soul. I was sad to hear he passed this year. Yeah.
God bless his soul, honestly. You met
I had lunch with him and told him I'd seen him on an old episode of A Touch of Frost the week before, and he was so.
God!
He was so knocked out by the fact
I know
that
what exact episode you're talking about. Me and my friends always joke about it. Oh my gosh, it's like when his house gets robbed, he's like,
he was a
those
villain.
bastards broke into my house, stole my wife's fur coats and jewelry, kidnapped my daughter, and subjected her.
Wasn't he a villain in it?
I think so. I haven't seen the full episode.
Yeah, I think he was in more than one. In one of them, I know he was a bad guy.
I've seen him in Alf Wiedersehen Pet. I think he was Mickey Starter.
Yeah. Right.
Love him. Oh man, so funny as well.
I was in Hollywood for those 6 months doing the Rocky and Bullwinkle movie, doing the narrator voice, William Conrad, and doing Bullwinkle and Boris. And the girls who were on the casting of that movie recommended me to Britt Allcroft because she was in Hollywood at the time looking for a voice for Diesel and a couple of other things. So I went and auditioned, and she was mentioning like she wanted a voice like Orson Welles or some distinctive villain voice. And I just tried a couple of things, and then I thought, well, either I'll hear from them or I won't. And I got back to Sydney, and within a week, they'd arranged a flight for me to go to Toronto in Canada and be the voice of Diesel. And I did it, and I recorded the thing. We were there for about 4 or 5 days.
And you met Michelangelo?
Yeah, I did. He was very nice, and also the young guy who did, can't think of his name, blonde guy. He did the voice.
Was it the original voice of Thomas?
Yes, yeah. But I had lunch with those guys, and then we went to the studio and saw some of the modeling.
John Bellis.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, very nice guy, John Bellis. Yeah. And then I flew to LA for a couple of days, and by the time I got home, it was only another week, and Don Pitts rang me up from LA and said, they want to change the voice of Diesel. They've done a little preview, and the character, you did him as a villain, but he was so villainous, they're scared that it might upset little kids. I to this day, I still think kids would understand it, because I did exactly the same voice as the old big bad wolf on the Walt Disney Three Little Pigs. And I'm sure a lot of little kids saw that back in the 1930s and they weren't scared.
Yeah, wow.
But anyway, that was at least I had a 5-minute career in the Thomas property.
You were too good for them. You were too good.
Oh, well, that's a nice way of putting it.
I have the photo somewhere of you with Michael, with Britt.
It was a group shot. Yeah,
it was. I'll just.
That was the day we went back to the studio after lunch, and it was just before they, said goodbye to us, because all the recording was finished.
And I'm still jealous that you got to meet Michelangelos. Yeah, there's John Bellis on the left, and then
and there's
Patrick
Britt Allcroft in the middle.
Allcroft, Michael, and you.
Yeah. Oh. I remember that day very well.
What was it like meeting Michael?
In one sense, I was so used to, my 30 years of voiceover work. It was just like doing another job with an actor that you meet that day. I knew of him. I'd known him from British dramas, and he was very professional. I'm sure he thought I was. And it was just very pleasant. But it was just like so many of these jobs you do, it's like ships in the night. You might not ever see them again, or you might work with them a lot, That's just the philosophy you take in for this business once you kind of used to it.
About A Touch of Frost, right?
I did. I mentioned that I had just seen him about 2 weeks before in Sydney on a repeat of A Touch of Frost, and he was amazed. I suppose he would think, but then he said that he'd been in Sydney quite a few times. I guess he'd done a few productions that were done in Australia. I can't think of what they would have been.
I believe he only starred in one episode of A Touch of Frost. It was the episode Penny for a Guy. No, it was just the one episode. He was Reggie Stansfield in the episode Penny for the Guy.
Okay, right.
Yeah, that was 1997.
I do remember him. I remember him saying that he'd been to Sydney a couple of times, and I'm sure that would have been on a professional basis, either a stage play or a film or something, and that he wanted to get back to Sydney. But he still seemed amazed that somebody from Australia knew that he was in this Frost thing. Couldn't believe it. But he was very pleasant. He was very pleasant and very professional,
Yeah, and man, I can't believe for some reason, when he died, the first person I thought of was you, because obviously you met him behind the scenes of Magic Railroad. Man, what a guy. I've seen him in a lot of stuff now. I've been rewatching most of his stuff, and oh my gosh.
I do remember sitting around the table with him when we were doing the read-through the night before we recorded all the soundtrack for Thomas.
Yeah.
And kind of getting to know him, and that was very pleasant.
Yeah, definitely.
It was about a 6-hour recording, and it was all finished. Uh-huh. And they had to do some more work on the Rocky and Bullwinkle movie, which wasn't released till the following year.
Yeah.
So they found out I was in Canada, and then I went from the Thomas session, stayed in the same studio, and they hooked me up to New York, and I did some work on the Bullwinkle movie.
Oh, wow. Did you ever tell anyone else on the Thomas set about your work on Rocky and Bullwinkle? Did you tell Mike?
I think it just came up in conversation that everyone was talking about current projects that they were involved in.
Uh-huh. Wow.
And the main stuff for Bullwinkle had been shot, but it wasn't until around about early 2000 that they started getting the voice people back into the studio, back and forth. They flew me back 10 times in the year 2000 back and forth from Sydney to LA.
Wow.
Just to do little pickup lines and things. And
That's so
it was,
crazy.
yeah, it was.
Wow. Someone has made like an well, my friend actually made like an automated Michelangelo's voice on this website where you put in anything and it will say something in his voice.
Ah, right.
So
right.
it's like an AI. It's really creepy, but it's actually
It is,
surprisingly accurate.
yeah.
I have to send you a clip of it at some point.
It was after we did the last day of shooting the Rocky and Bullwinkle movie, and I was living in LA for 6 months during that shoot because they had me sort of like Charles Fleischer, who did the voice of Roger Rabbit. He was the first one to be asked to be on the set for the whole shoot so that he could do the voice and they could react to it, the live actors, and the animation would be added like months down the track. So the last day of that movie, the casting people said, hey, there's a company in Canada that's doing Thomas, and I hadn't really, watched those cartoons because it was one generation below me, and I'd still been watching all the older stuff that I grew up with. And but I kind of knew about, Thomas the Tank Engine as a property. And they said they're looking for a new voice for Diesel, the villainous engine, And they flew me to Toronto to do that. And that, like many showbiz stories, I recorded it, and they were very happy. And then they ran a test audience, apparently, and and I was, along with the other voices, was replaced by all new voices. And the reason they gave me was that my interpretation of Diesel was so scary that little kids were scared of it. It was like but I based it on the Big Bad Wolf from Disney's old Three Little Pigs. It was that sort of voice, like, why don't you come to me, or I'll tell you. So it was that cartoony villain. And I think it got replaced by something a little more generic and maybe a little less, scary at bedtime.
Yeah. I think it was a New Jersey accent, if I remember right.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I've seen some clips on YouTube, because, when YouTube came along, that was a whole new revolution. Then stuff that surfaced from there was I've seen things that I did and I'd forgotten doing.
What was your reaction when they revealed to you that you were going to be replaced as the Diesel 10 voice?
I think I'd been in the business for so long by then that I just thought, oh, well, this is par for the course. It didn't really bother me. It would have been nice to be on the movie, but it happens all the time. Let me tell you. At first, I thought it was only me. I thought, oh, what did I do wrong?
Can you give your Diesel 10 impressions if you can, the ones you used, the lines you did?
I can't remember them. It's so long, but I know that the footage exists. I should have kept the script. I should have had it ready for podcasts like this. It was just some threatening line right near the beginning where he sort of looked straight at the camera, Diesel, with a kind of an evil grin. And it was, if you ever find the dialogue, I can reproduce it for you the way I did it. Although apparently you may have heard that there's a cut down reel, which they call the director's cut, where they've used part of me and part of the replacement guy. I've heard it, and just occasionally I'll think, oh, yes, that's me. And it's like 20 years gets stripped away, and it's just like I'm there in the studio. It just all comes rushing back to me, this studio in Toronto. So I just said, oh, that's a pity, and then I just moved on, really, because I think when you're in this game so many times, as I say, you'll get replaced even on commercials. A client might say, oh, yeah, no, that's a clever voice, but no, we let's replace him. We really want just a straight announcer, So it happens so often. It was just like par for the course. So it's just the way the business is. And the only thing would be that in that instance, I guess I was a little disappointed simply because it was a feature film, and it would have been nice to be associated with that. But c'est la vie, these things happen. I stayed as busy as I ever was for several years after that, so it didn't hurt me. And to be honest, I sometimes wonder if sometimes they overcorrect things. Who knows? If they'd released all of us original voices, it might have been just as big a success. I just don't know. Nobody can ever say. It would be nice if they could restore all of our stuff and see it like an alternate version.
I just finished Rocky and Bullwinkle. Like all of these things, you record it a year before it's ever made. So it was actually in '99. I just finished the filming of Rocky and Bullwinkle, where I was the narrator and Bullwinkle Moose. And I was still in Hollywood before I flew back to Australia. And the casting people gave me the name of Britt Allcroft, who is the lady, she's just passed away recently, but she was...
Rest in peace, Britt, yeah.
Yeah, she was producing the movie version of the Thomas the Tank Engine TV, series. And they wanted a new voice for Diesel. And because it was going to be a big budget movie production, they wanted it to be really scary and evil. So I kind of did a voice that was very much like one of those. It was a little bit based on the big bad wolf from Three Little Pigs. And apparently, I recorded the whole thing along with some of the actors from England who, doing their famous bits. And then they called my agent in. I was back home in Sydney. And said, "Oh, we're going to have to replace Keith because at the previews, all the little kids were scared of him."
What?
Yeah.
Really?
That was the executive's feeling, that I was going to be too scary. That's really what it was. I think they said there was some kids at the preview, but you never know to believe these stories 100%. But and then I found out, like years go by, and they also replaced 3 other actors on that. So the final cut has different people than the ones I stood in the studio with. They flew me to Toronto to do that. They were recording it in Canada. I just heard that the people who really have been digging at this, the true fans, have now got a director's cut, and apparently they've restored all of my dialogue in one version of it. So
yeah. Well, actually, Joseph Marshall, who's been on social media for a while, he's been known as an archivist, and he's been bringing back a lot of Australian nostalgic content. He's currently in the middle of restoring the original cut with a few other people, and it's like, it's really big. Like, we cannot wait, and hopefully we'll get to see your original performance in its true form, and maybe it'll help clear up, why, will it look better? Will it not look better because of all the cuts? We have no idea. But I think looking at the original version, what it should have been, I think is going to help a lot, and I think we would be very excited. We can't wait to see your original version as well.
Good on you.
Yeah, I mean, if it isn't scary, then I'll just be like really surprised why. I think the one they got anyway was scary.
Yeah, good. I must admit, I had a bit of a thing about watching the replacement, thinking, I think I'll pass on that. But I was more disappointed than anything else, But that sort of thing happens in this business all the time. People get replaced, and you don't hear about it till years later. It's quite common, especially when people are panicking about money and thinking, this will flop at the box office or whatever the reason is. But I'd already been through that with Rocky and Bullwinkle, even though I love doing that movie. That one also tanked at the box office. The only successful movie project I've ever done was George of the Jungle, the first one. That was a big success for the Disney company.